Okay, so let us start again. So I have quite many things to do, but as promised, I will start, a bit delay from this morning, but I will start with hopefully half of the lecture will be like this morning, and the second half will be on slides to do some extension where I won't have to give the details, but to give you some taste of what can be done experimentally. And then we can discuss later today or tomorrow about these things. So what I've shown you this morning is what are Gaussian states. We discussed about squeeze state, coherent state, entangled state. I want to start with coming back a little bit in general with parametric down conversions, because this is really the mostly widely used tool to generate non-classical light. And the question is, does parametric down conversion generate Gaussian states? Well, the answer is yes. There's a nice way to see it here, which will lead me through the rest of the first part of this lecture. So if you take a Hamiltonian of parametric down conversion, it looks a bit like that. So it creates two photons in two different modes, n and m. And you have, as we have seen before, I take the discrete way because it's easier for me to write. And you have a coupling matrix which is J. You can write it with coefficients of J like that. I will do one assumption. I will assume that this one is real and symmetric. So in parametric down conversion, it is always symmetric. It's the same probability to generate two photons. But it's not always real. But this makes my life simpler, because if it is real and symmetric, I can simply write J this way, where this is a diagonal matrix, and O is an orthogonal matrix because it's real. So I can do a diagonalization of my symmetric and real matrix. And this, I can plug it back into my, my Hamiltonian, which is here. I can just replace, right? This is I h bar j, A dagger transpose, and then I have, maybe I should have it, if you don't mind. Well, it doesn't change, but I put the transpose here so that it looks a bit better. But and then I have O transpose J, A, sorry, O and A. And here I've got B. I will manage. Okay, now this is it. So then you see where I go. Huh? This is a new basis of modes. So this I can call B, like this. And here I've got B dagger transpose. Okay? So now my Hamiltonian is diagonal. So I can write it again. So if D, I take a diagonal matrix with coefficients which are lambda A, lambda K. My Hamiltonian, if I write it this way, will become I h bar G sum over K of lambda K B K dagger squared. So plus Hermitian conjugate, of course. Okay? So what you very easily see is that this Hamiltonian, which looks like generating a lot of entanglement between many different modes, if you diagonalize your coupling matrix here, what you get is just a set of independent squeezers. So remember, this morning, we have seen that for each K, this gives rise to squeezing. So what you have is that this system, in fact, generates many squeezers. Of course, in a given basis, which is here. Okay? So I did one assumption, which I will remove a bit later on, but this is, in fact, very general results. Your parametric down conversion can be seen, if you look in the proper basis, as multimode squeezing operations. Okay? And the entanglement comes only from a basis change. So you can see either from here or from a basis change is completely equivalent. Okay? One remark I want to do at this point, which is, so what you see here, the answer is because this generates squeeze states, and squeeze states are Gaussian states, my parametric down conversion generates Gaussian states. Okay? Because if I do a basis change on a Gaussian state, I will remain a Gaussian state.
Sorry.
Yeah?
How do you go from the dagger to the dagger square?
Because this is diagonal matrix.
Yeah, but
So
dagger square instead of the dagger B?
Because I got something wrong, isn't it? Nobody noticed, but here you have dagger, here you have dagger. Yeah, sorry, thanks for noticing, indeed. So used to put a dagger A, so at some point the dagger are removed. But no, because I come from here. So it's dagger everywhere. Yeah. Thank you. And of course, because I know the result at the end, you get to the proper formula. But so one remark I want to do, so this generate Gaussian states. You can wonder, it's a bit apart, but still it's important, what happens when we generate single photon state? Because we also generate single photon state with parametric down conversion. So it should be the same. So first what you can wonder is why parametric down conversions here gives rise to Gaussian states, and why we also use it to generate single photon, which are obviously non-Gaussian states.
One is a conditional.
Yeah, so of course the answer is this, what you do, and this is why I want to look. So the way to generate single photons, and I will look at that right now, is that usually you do like this, and you place a detector here, and when you have a click here, you know you generate a photon here. So you remove the vacuum component somehow, the main effect. It's post-selection, and it's conditioning, or we call post-selection, it's conditioning. So you take a subset of your states. So it's nice to see that, but apart from that, what is here, I mean, my diagonalization still applies. Now, I should put it full screen, sorry. Still applies. So let's write it the way people in single photon write it. Yes?
Something to do is when you write it with eigenvalue.
Here? This is a squeezing Hamiltonian. This is the one we have seen this morning, only for 1K, but this is a sum of squeezing Hamiltonian independent from each other because they apply to orthogonal modes. But the one I've done this morning, I was I h bar j a dagger squared. This is the one I've shown this morning for Kimball experiment. Yeah? So this is a squeezing Hamiltonian. So if you look at, so I took this review paper I like because, but there's many of them. Huh? So if you look in this paper, the formulas that are in, what you find, so first that the Hamiltonian they consider is this one, so this is exactly the one we have used for Hong-Gou-Mandel, so it's back here. So this one is the same as this one, it's just a continuous version. Huh? So either you take discrete frequencies or continuous frequency, but it's exactly the same. Okay? So you have this kind of Hamiltonian, which gives rise to these two photon states, so that's what they usually write. When you write this two photon state, here you just remove this vacuum component. So you assume that you will do post-selections, and because the state generated should be vacuum plus this. Okay, and plus even higher order terms, so you do a first order expansion and you remove the vacuum. Okay, and that's why you get something which is highly non-Gaussian. Then you can apply the same technique as here, but now you don't have a J matrix, you have this kind of a function which is here, but this is equivalent. So one more difference is here my two photons are created not in the same mode, but in two modes which don't propagate in the same directions. Okay, but at the end of the day, the same physics which is behind. So what you can do is this function, you can write like this. Okay, and this is a property, I will come back to it a bit later, but any functions, this I just tell you, so then you have to look in mathematics, any functions, so I don't have to do any assumption of these functions. You can always factorize it like this, it's like a Schmidt decomposition. So it's a sum over k of square root of lambda k, so here you put square root to stress that this is a positive real coefficient, and you have a set of functions g and h. So it's like eigen decompositions, the same as here, but their eigenmodes are not the same for my Heidler photons and for my signal photons. And then your psi here becomes, have this simple expression which is here, and maybe I should have put on the slide, but I will write it here, just to be sure. So what I define as a gk like that, I put a gk dagger like that because it's written here. It's really the integral of gk of omega s, a dagger of omega s, d omega s. Okay? So this is my new annihilation operators. It's a basis change, but a continuous one, but it's still a basis change. Okay? So what this says is that the same happens. So your complicated Hamiltonian, in fact, generate pairs of photons with some probabilities and in a mode which are well defined. if you take still in this article, and then I will stop on this point, but still in this article, they study what happens for a generic phase matching function. So this is this beta function is this one here. So this is for standard crystal and pulsed operations with well, not too exotic things. So you have this function here which is not factorized, and what you show is that these functions, beta of omega s, omega I, is a sum of this set of functions, where here now this one is a G1 and this one is H1. And this one here is a product of these two. This one is a G2, H2, Z3, H3, and in fact when you have a Gaussian phase matching like that, you find that the functions G and H are very similar. They just have a different spread, exactly, they have a different spectrum, but they have exactly the same shape. Okay? So what it means is that if I detect a photon here, I don't know which one it is. So I don't know if it's a photon from a G1, G2, G3. This I don't know. So it means that the photon I have here is a statistical superposition of a photon on H1, a photon on H2, a photon on H3. Okay? So now what I have is a photon which is a non-pure state, which I cannot write as a single photon anymore. Okay? So this is for people trying to make nice single photon. This is a problem. So what you want to do, and it's exactly what we have done with Rangu-Mandel, you want to have only one eigenvalue here which is different from 0, so that when you detect a photon here, you always have the same here. Okay? But the structure of this mathematics is exactly the same as this one. Okay? It's a multimode state, superposition of a dual space like this. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, there's no delta. Huh? This is a J, this is a J, this is a J. Sorry, that's yeah. That's encoding. It should be different, but yeah, these are supposed to be all J's. Okay. So then I realized I didn't do the animation for the next slide, which is the last one that contains mathematics. But anyway, so it will appear all at the same time. Don't be afraid. I will comment a little bit. So, okay. So that's the question now. So let's stop with single photon and go back to Gaussian states. And can I generalize these kind of things? So the answer is yes. Huh? You can generalize these kind of things, and for that, you have to consider really the evolution of your states. And I think I will do. Sorry, I will change that because I don't like it like that. Oops. I will. What is? Oh, sorry. I need something is wrong. Oops. No, can't find it. Oops. Okay, I'm coming back. Here it is. Sorry for that. Let's move on. Okay. So I want to tell you, so this is something which is a bit mathematical, but you will see which then contains a lot of physics. So that's why I want to say. So what we are doing here is evolutions. And in fact, all these evolutions are linear evolution, huh? Because when we have derived the squeezing operations, you have seen when we look at the evolution equations, they become linear. Okay, quadratic Hamiltonian become linear evolutions. So what is interesting is to look at all possible linear evolution of your field. So this is something which is quite well defined. And you take your quadrature operators, you apply a matrix, you get new quadrature operators. That's a linear evolutions. And what I want to see is what are all these possible linear operations. Okay? So by all, what is the only constraint I have is that the commutation relation after my linear evolution is the same as the one as before. Okay? So that's kind of easy constraints. And this, in fact, so the beta matrix here is the same as the one we used for the commutator before. Huh? And the only constraint you have is this S beta S transpose is equal to beta. So this is equivalent. Okay, you can do the math. Huh? It's quite easy. And the evolution of the, so this is the evolution of the operators, and as we've said this morning, the evolution of the covariance matrix can be written like that. Okay, and then you have a very powerful theorem, which in fact is quite equivalent to what I wrote here. which tells you that there is always a simple decomposition of your evolution, whatever it is. As soon as it satisfies this, so this is called a symplectic evolution, as soon as it satisfies these commutation relations, you can always decompose it in this form. And this form, in fact, is simple. So O1 and O2 are really the equivalent to the O which are here. So they are basis change. And K here is a squeezing operator. Okay, so it's exactly the same as I did here, but now I don't have to make extra assumptions. So any linear evolutions can be expressed as, so this O1 is the one we have seen this morning. These are simply basis change. So the unitary we have seen since the beginning. And K is a squeezing matrix, which is like that. Huh? So it's S1 and 1 over S1 is a squeezing we have seen this morning. So S1 will apply to Q1, and 1 over S1 will apply to P1. So we'll have a state which is squeezed with a S squared variance on first mode and 1 over S squared variance on the P quadrature of the first mode. Okay? So is that, don't hesitate if you have questions on that. It's important to understand. And then I will try to comment what is the physics behind and show you some, and then switch to some experimental examples. I need to revise that. So the message here is that any linear evolution can be decomposed into basis change and squeezing operation. So why is this interesting? Because if I write my covariance matrix, now if I do an experiment with a linear evolution, so you can think with a quadratic Hamiltonian, because we have seen before that a quadratic Hamiltonian is a linear evolution. So what you will get, when you do an experiment, usually in this quadratic thing, you start from the vacuum, okay, to which you apply your linear evolution. So the covariance matrix at the output of your experiment will be of this form. I put, which way I put it? S transpose, these directions. So this is the vacuum, and this is your evolution. Okay? But this is the covariance matrix of the vacuum, it's an identity. So this is simply S transpose. Okay? And then I use this, and because O2 is a basis change, O2 transpose is the identity. So what I guess is O1 K squared O1 transpose. Okay? So this is the covariance matrix I get for any state I generate through parametric down conversion. And what is it? This is a squeezing. This is a Sn squared, S2 squared, 1 over S1 squared, and so on, and 0 everywhere. So this is a squeezing matrix, so like the one we have seen this morning for a single mode, but now it's a squeezing for many modes, and a basis change. And the basis change is simply linear evolutions, like with beam splitter, or phase shifter, and this kind of thing. Okay? And what is even more important, which I don't fully demonstrate here, is that all pure Gaussian states can be written in this form. So in fact, you can access all pure Gaussian states through linear evolution, and so they are all written like that. Okay? So this is quite interesting because Gaussian states, it means that we know all of them. They are very well classified. There is no unknown things. All the Gaussian states can be written as multimode squeezing and basis change. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, if I see this symplectic evolution with, let's say, an evolution with respect to a parameter field, right? This parameter field would be in both all field matrix, or is there a way in which we can fix that?
So here I have no parameter T. Huh?
Yeah,
So this is an input-output relation. So I have a crystal. I've got light coming in and light coming out, and I look at the output light compared to the input one.
I want to see how this output light varies with the length of the crystal.
Yeah. You could, okay, so you could put S of L or T, whatever. Yeah.
And this thing would be in all the matrix, or is there a way to put it on in the squeezing operator?
Why? For parametric deconversion, in fact, you could put it only in the. It depends on the coupling matrix you have. the fact that in parametric down conversion is symmetric, it makes that the input basis and the output basis are always the same, so you can factorize them. But it's not general. You have some case of a chi-3 effects that do effective parametric interaction or quadratic, where you lose this symmetry thing, and you can have different input and output basis. Okay, but for all the common case, it is the same. Okay. So you can in fact do the same approach for non-pure states. It's slightly more complicated, but that's not the point here. But just to let you know, in fact, you can also classify nearly the same way if your state is non-pure. So just some extra subtleties, which I don't want to go into right now. So this tells you two things. First, if you do an experiment and you want to generate a given Gaussian state, well, this tells you a way to do it experimentally. You take squeezers and you implement this basis change. And just after that, I will show you how people have done that. Okay? And this tells you another thing, is that if you have a Gaussian entangled state, it always exists a basis where it is not entangled. Okay? So you don't have this notion of intrinsic entanglement for a Gaussian state. A Gaussian state, if you look it in the proper way, because basis change is really measuring it using the proper modes, it becomes separable. And this is true for pure and non-pure states. Okay? And if you remember well, when we looked at the Bell state, I didn't it in complete details, but in the Bell state, this is not true anymore. The Runge-Mendel state, it's true, you have a basis where it's separable. The Bell state is not true anymore. I don't find a basis where it's separable. Okay? But Gaussian states are like that. So somehow it limits a little bit what you can do with them, but it's interesting to characterize that. Okay? So this comes from, maybe I can just show the slide which is here. So in fact this, it's quite recent. This block method decomposition comes from an article of Samuel Bronstein from 2005, which explains exactly that. And mathematically, this is based on singular value decomposition. And if you don't know singular value decomposition, I really encourage you to look at it. Wikipedia webpage is very well done. And it's a very, very useful tool. Each time you have a linear input-output relation, it's a very useful mathematical tool. Okay? So now we'll switch to a more seminar-like, but if you have some question on that, please do so. It's all clear? No, I guess it's not, but please. Well, I will come back to it, in fact, in the seminar-like thing. So it's back to good old PowerPoint presentations. So this is that you can see that actually it moves, but I didn't know how to make it move in LaTeX. But it does move. Okay. So now let's study a few experiments and go on in what we do in our group. It's also an occasion to do that. So one of the first articles really doing that is from a Chinese group. So they wanted to generate this kind of GHZ state for continuous variable. A GHZ state, I don't details exactly, but it's a 4-mode. So they wanted a 4-mode cluster state. I will come back to that. But it's a 4-mode entangled state. So they want to get a given covariance matrix of a Gaussian state. And so the way they do, because they cannot generate it directly, is that they take 4 squeeze states. So here you have, and actually I have them, if you look at the Wiener function here, you have 4 squeeze states that come out of 2 squeeze state generators. So these are the same as the one we have seen this morning with the experiment of Kimball, except that these ones are non-degenerate, so they work on 2 polarization. So at the output of each cavity, in fact, you got 2 squeeze states at 2 orthogonal polarization. I think you have shown this 2-mode squeeze Hamiltonian yesterday. So it's really the same 2-mode Hamiltonian you have in here. So you get 2 squeeze states. So each cavity gives you 2 squeeze states, so you have 4 of them here. Well, then this I had, so this is just to remind you what I say. You take 2 squeeze states, you put them on the mean splitter, you get 2 entangled states. And this is equivalent to that. So this is a specific case of this one. Okay? And then you can measure them. Well, I guess there's no need. I will move on. So what they have done is this. So then they take these 4 squeeze states and they take a set of beam splitters and a phase shifter. So, but it's just linear optics. Okay, you have some beam splitters here, you have some phase you can control. This is just to implement this O1 matrix which is here. Okay? So this is the representation, in fact, the transformation they do. And then they do homodyne detection to check and to characterize the covariance matrix, because with homodyne detection you can measure variances, so you can access to the covariance matrix and check that it corresponds to the state you want. Okay, and they measure this kind of thing, the kind of curve you see in this kind of particles. You see this kind of curves when they do sum and difference of sum in the homodyne and they compare to the vacuum. So each time the black line is the vacuum noise of your homodyne, and this displays squeezing, so it shows you that you are in the quantum regime. Yes.
What numbers are on the y-axis?
Here it's dBs.
No, I know the unit, but like, sorry, what number? Like, how much are they getting?
Oh, here I don't even know. I should say it doesn't look big. It's like this is 1, so this is 1.5.
Okay.
So now people do much better, but as far as I know, this is the first doing that. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to what we do in our group, so which is a bit of a generalization of that, where we use, instead of using, so here they use spatial modes that they multiplex on beam splitter, so which is a bit hard. So what we try to do is to use optical frequency combs. How much time I have? Yeah, it should be fine. So, and we are not the only one to do that. Huh? Why optical frequency combs? Well, I guess you know them. An optical frequency comb is a set of pulses. In our case, what we use is about 100 femtosecond pulses with 80 megahertz repetition rate. When you look at that in the frequency domain, this is made as a set of discrete frequencies because you have a periodic system. So you do Fourier transform and you have discrete frequencies. So this is not fair representations, because for this kind of settings, what you have is about 10 to the 5 or 10 to the 6 frequencies that compose your frequency comb. But this is nice because all these frequencies are modes. Okay? And so if I manage to play with them through a quadratic Hamiltonian and do basis change, I can play with a huge space and do a lot of entanglement and so on. Okay? So that's the theory. We see in practice it's not as many modes, but it's really getting there. So then we use parametric down conversions, as I told you. But now it's non-degenerate. So if I take a POMP photon, which is at the given frequency of my parametric down conversion, I can generate 2 photons in my output frequency comb. That would be symmetric for energy conservation. Okay, so here I really tell you the same as I said before, but with small drawings to be sure makes it clear. So if I have this kind of settings, what I would get, and this is what many, so this is very similar, I would say, to the Ongo Mendel experiments, you would get pairs of photons which are symmetric relative to the mean frequency if you have a single frequency pump. Okay, but because the pump of our system is also a pulse, it's also composed of different frequencies. So now if you take a second frequency of your pump, it can generate 2 photons symmetric to this one. So now you will correlate these 2 frequency bands. And if you get a third line, it will go here, and so on. So in fact, what you get is a big coupling, and it's exactly the same Hamiltonian as the one I've shown you before, with a coupling matrix that once again reflects the bandwidth of your pump and the phase matching of your crystal. And now if you look at what happens in a photon picture, it means that you still produce pairs of photons, but which don't have any reason anymore to be symmetric to a given frequency. So which in other way means that all frequencies are potentially entangled. Okay? Yes?
I'm not sure I understand. You send the frequency comb into a Kaito crystal and
Yes.
that does the down conversion?
Yes. So this is a pump photon at, in our case, 400 nanometers, and you down convert to 800 nanometers. Okay, in the Kaito crystal. In fact, I have the actual experiment is a bit like that. So we place that in a cavity because we want to do squeezing. But this is really the pump thing, which is not resonant in the cavity, your Kaito crystal, and your down converted field, which is itself resonant in the cavity. Okay?
The phase matching, phase matching is for the whole spectrum?
So there's 2 things. So the crystal is very thin, it's like half a millimeter. So the phase matching is very broad of the crystal. The other thing, which is a bit harder, is that you want that all your frequencies here be resonant in that cavity. That's why, in fact, I put a picture of the cavity. So this is how the cavity looks. So in fact, the cavity we have is a bit complicated. It's 4 meters long. So why is it 4 meters long? Because in fact, you want that the length of the cavity corresponds to the distance between two incoming pulses. If you're an optician, what it means is that the free spectral range of your cavity corresponds to the repetition rate of your laser. Okay? And finally, in a very more pragmatic way, it means that the length of this cavity is the same of the laser cavity length, so that they have the same resonances. Okay? At the end of the day, that's what you do. So this never works completely, because then you have dispersion in the cavity and all these things. But for a spectrum of 10 nanometers, it's fine. We have no dispersion effect, and it's a very low finesse cavity, like 20 or 30. So it resonates for all this frequency without too many problems. Okay? So this is how we generate this squeeze light. So then I have a photo of the experiment. I left it here. Well, much welcome. So then how do we detect? So this is also something, of course, here I take the example of what we do, because of the equation here, but we are not the only one to do that. So you want to detect your many modes. So there's two ways. I will show one now and another one a bit later. But the first thing is that if you want to detect your many modes at the same time, so you still do homodyne detections, but what we want to do is homodyne detections and detect all the different frequencies. So there's one way to do. This one is doing a bit like a spectrometer, in fact. So here it's a standard homodyne setup. When you have your signals that come here, your local oscillator that come here, they mix here, and then you do the difference between your two detectors. But the difference is that here we have grating, and if you look at one line, for instance, if you do the blue line here, the blue line here, and this one makes the difference between this detector and this detector. So here you have a homodyne detection for the blue line. Okay? But in practice, in fact, you have homodyne detections for all the lines. So this technically is a bit hard to do many. So in our group, we do like 16 homodyne detections working all together, each at a different set of frequencies. Okay? So you can measure many modes at the same time doing that. Okay, I'll put some technicalities here. I'm not sure they are completely important, but you have to be sure, of course, that the local phase you have here of your homodyne detection is well controlled, so that you are sure which quadrature you measure on each pixel. Yes?
But then the local oscillator has to have a spectrum that covers the whole of your comb.
Yes, yes, and that's indeed a difficulty. So that's a very good point. So first, the local oscillator doesn't have to be completely flat, because you can compensate. As soon as you have the same power here, then you can compensate. The problem we have is, and I will come back to that, is that the down-converted light has a spectrum which is a bit bigger than the original laser. And this limits a lot, in fact, the modes we can measure. And this, you have to find other ways with looking at nonlinear effects to do that, but so far we don't. So at the end of the day, the experiment, yeah?
When you showed the homodyne detection like this morning,
Yeah.
you had only your local oscillator and the signal.
Yes.
And then why here? So in the picture that you showed just before, it's as if you count the coincidences between the two formed lines. So
There's no coincidences. This is two detectors and make a difference. Yeah. So this is really like, no, in fact, this, if you want to think, this prism, you could put before the beam splitter, because it's linear, it's fully equivalent. So in fact, it's really like having a local oscillator in the blue to measure the blue line of my signal. Okay, so it's really 16 homodyne detection working together. It's just easier to put the grating here than before for alignment purposes, but it's fully equivalent. Yeah. Okay, so the experiments we do, it looks a bit like that. And then you can measure, doing that, so this is how it looks, all your signals. So this is nice because it means you can measure, using that, your covariance matrix. So covariance matrix I defined here. Here you can measure directly. So if you have 16 pixels, so in practice we have 8, so we have to do some trick to get 16, but at the end of the day the concept is the same. So if you have 16 pixels, you can measure your covariance matrix. Sorry, this is the old notation. So this is Q. It's Q and P. I kept the X and P notation. You have both. But, so we measure this covariance matrix. We measure the amplitude quadrature and the phase quadrature covariance matrix. We don't measure the correlation between the two. Well, in fact, we do measure, but parametric down conversions, when the pomp is real, that doesn't generate any correlation between X and P quadrature. So in fact, the other terms of the covariance matrix are 0. So you get these kind of things. So this is experimentally measure covariance matrices for the phase quadrature and the amplitude quadrature. Okay? So then there's a lot of things you can do with that. I'll be happy to comment if you want some more, but first, this is a covariance matrix which corresponds to an entangled state. And the question is, how do you check this is an entangled state? So this I told you this morning, it's a complicated issue. So I didn't put the details here, but we had collaboration for some groups, theoretician groups, to derive multipartite entanglement criteria. And here you can show it's a multipartite entanglement. And again, if you want to know more, I'm happy to comment that after the lecture, but I think here it's a bit too much details. Then there is another thing you can do, which is linked to what I've done here, is try to do this decomposition which is here. Okay? So this is really what I want to do. So you can do it two ways. First, you can do it mathematically. This is exactly what I've explained to you. You can diagonalize this Hamiltonian. So Hermitian conjugate is missing, but it's the same thing. So you can diagonalize this Hamiltonian, and you find, again, that you have some modes where your Hamiltonian is diagonal. What is interesting is to know what are these modes, because if you have, in the case of our Gaussian phase matching, it's very close to that, you can calculate. And these modes are the same as the one I've shown you just before in the case of the simultaneous case. They look like Hermite-Gauss modes, but in the time domain. So in fact, the eigenmodes of your system now are different pulse shapes. Okay? For those that follow here, of course, I've written it in the temporal domain because Hermite-Gauss modes are self-Fourier transform. If you look them in the spectral domain, they would have the same shape. Okay? But really, what you can think is that the pulse which is generated by your system is a superposition of different pulse shapes, each of them being in a different quantum state. And what this Hamiltonian means is that I will generate two photons in one of these pulses. Either here, either here, either here. Okay? So this is my quadratic Hamiltonian. And then if I place my cavity around, all these pulses will become squeeze state. Okay? But this I didn't do anything. It's just looking at my light in a different way. Okay? And this is what is summarized here. Maybe I can make it fully. So this is what we have measured. So the pulse shape here, I didn't put the measure one because of presentation that's simple. That's a theoretical one. But what you can see is that if you do, so this is the equivalent to the experiment I've shown you before from the Chinese group, but in a different regime. You have this kind of system that generates a big entangled state. But if you look at it in this basis, then it becomes a set of squeeze modes which are independent. Okay? And via measurements, you can extract this kind of things. So in our case, how we did, we measure this one, and we diagonalize the covariance matrix. So we apply we just calculate that, and we diagonalize the covariance matrix to extract the eigenmodes and the corresponding squeezing. Okay? So I have 20 minutes left. I think that's fine. Do you have any question on that? Then I want to say a few words on why is this interesting, so why people are looking at that. So I think I have too many slides on this part, so I might cut it a little bit. But just to say a few words, so what makes the buzz a little bit in this kind of domains is this one-way or measurement-based quantum computing. So doing quantum computing with photons is something which is difficult because then you have to do nonlinear gates, and doing a nonlinear gate that works at the photon level is very hard. So a proposal which has been done is instead of doing the standard circuit model of quantum computing, what you do is you generate, well, you don't generate, I don't know. It should come back, yes. Well, you generate a big entangled state like this. So this is just a graphic representation, but it's these are modes and these are correlations. Okay. You generate a big entanglement state and you do measurements on this state to do your computations. So the two mode things you have, for instance, you have two modes, you entangle them through some ways, and I will come back to that, and you do measurement on one, and on the output you have done something on your input state. Okay, so that's a way to do this kind of things. In our regime, in fact, the kind of state you need are called cluster states. And a cluster state is something like that. You start from 4 squeeze states. This is an example. You start from 4 squeeze states, and you apply in any of these 2 squeeze states this kind of evolution, which is a CZ gate. But so this x1 and x2 are 2 quadrature operators. So this is still a quadratic evolution. Huh? Okay, it's the exponential of this one. So you get this kind of state, which will correlate any of these 2 modes. And so this is really to tell you why people are doing that. So this cluster state, in fact, verify some correlation properties. So if you look at this CZ gate, it's a bit complicated. This is much simpler. So if I take one of these modes here, I see that the p quadrature of this mode is correlated to the x quadrature of this one and the x quadrature of this one. Yeah. And sorry, all along here it's written x instead of q, but yeah, I think you can do the mapping. And so you look at this quantity, p1 minus x2 minus x4, which is called a nullifier of the system. So for each of them, you have that. And the criteria to have entanglement you need to do measurement-based quantum computing is that the variance of this goes to 0 if you start from infinite squeezing. Okay? So it's really like an entanglement criteria. So if you measure the variance of this minus this minus this, you have to check does it goes to 0 when you increase the squeezing. So it sounds like a complicating thing to do because you have squeezing here and you have this weird gate in between to do that. But the oh, sorry. So I think this one I want to check to pass because it's not interesting. But the point is that at the end of the day, this is also a Gaussian state. So because it's a Gaussian state, you can take 4 squeeze modes, 4 vacuum modes, take 4 squeezers, make a basis change, and get exactly the same. Okay? So I'm really back to here. Because this state is a Gaussian state, I don't have to generate it through this complicated way, which was a theoretician way of doing it. When you are experimentalist, this you don't know how to do. Huh? It's hard. But that's fine. You know which state you want, which has a given covariance matrix. You generate it through squeezing, through squeezing basis change, and you get the same state. Okay? And so the first article I've shown you from the Chinese group was a cluster state done exactly this way. And so this part is what we do with our cavity. So we generate, with our cavity, we generate this squeeze mode I've shown you with different temporal shapes, and then we have to implement the basis change. So we have done that. I will go quick on that because I really want to do the next point, which will be 15 minutes for that. But just to say, in our case, so how do we implement the basis change? In fact, we do a measurement in a different mode basis by shaping the local oscillator of our measurement. So this is a different way of doing a measurement. We generate a different pulse shape here, and it means we can interrogate the output of the cavity in any basis by doing that. Of course, it's not perfect, and because it means now we measure only one mode at a time, but still, with this, we could demonstrate all these cluster states which are here. Okay? So this was a bit quick. And you don't need too much for the rest, but just to give you a hint that we can generate this kind of complex entanglement through basis change. But I really would like to address this last point, because this is where maybe modern quantum optics goes. Is this really quantum computing? Well, as I told you, in this cluster states, I have my Wiener function is Gaussian. So the measurement statistics I will do are all Gaussian. Unfortunately, it can be shown that Gaussian statistics can always be efficiently simulated with a classical computer. So in fact, there's no way you can do interesting quantum computing with that. There's another way to see it, which I usually do like, is that in fact, your Wigner functions being positive, it is like a probability distribution. So it is like your hidden variable properties in the Bell inequalities. So which means that with Gaussian states, in no way you can violate Bell inequalities. Okay? So it's not the same kind of statistics that you will get from a base state, and that prevents you from doing quantum computing. Okay? So to violate Bayes inequalities, what you need is non-Gaussian states. And so what some people do think is that, well, single photon or photon number states are very good for quantum computing, but they are hard to scale experimentally. So you have most of the time, but many people are working on that, doing a lot of progress, but it's hard to scale experimentally. On the other hand, multimode entangled state in the Gaussian regime, this is what I've shown you from the cavity, it's a deterministic regeneration. So you can get quite easily a big dimension continuous variable states with large entanglement. So the idea is to mix these two things. So this is somehow called a hybrid quantum optics, and there's different way of doing that, and I will show you one. And the first, so you can try to combine these two things. This is one way, and the way we take ourselves is trying to de-Gaussify our Gaussian states. So this has been done a while ago, and as far as I know, the first group which has done that is a group of Philippe Grangier. So the way they have done that is that you take a squeeze state here. So I'm back to single mode. I take one squeeze state, and I take a beam splitter here to extract one photon. So my beam splitter have a very weak reflectivity, and when I see a click here, I post-select my state. So in practice, I apply the annihilation operator to my squeeze state. I remove a photon. A squeeze state is a state which is generated from a quadratic Hamiltonian. So I have A dagger squared. So it's composed only of even number of photons. Okay? If I apply the annihilation operator, what I get is this one. I remove the vacuum component, and this becomes a non-Gaussian state. So for instance, if you have weak squeezing, all the higher orders are 0, and what you get is very close to a single photon state. But in fact, you can show that whatever the squeezing level, this is a non-Gaussian state. Okay? So this is done experimentally. So this is one of the first experiments I've seen on that, where now they use pulse light, but just to generate squeeze light. Here you tap off a single photons, which goes in here, and then you do homodyne detections to measure the Wigner function of your state, conditioned on the fact that you measure a photon here. And what you find is this kind of a negative Wigner functions, and if you have questions, and you can ask Julien, because he did that, so he can tell you all the details about that. And this works very well, and you get very nice negative Wigner function with that. Okay, is that clear? So you combine your squeeze state, yes?
So when you record your click,
yes.
then immediately you start doing the homodyne detection?
So thank you for the questions, because that's one of the reasons I put the other reference here and I forgot to comment, which is also something which is done by Julien. You have really, it's complicated to know when you have a click here when you have to measure in the homodyne and for how long and on which temporal mode. So this is a complicated issue. And so this article they did with Julien does it very well for if you have a continuous squeezing, explain you how you can do that. In this case, it was a bit easier because you had pulse light. So what you do, your mode is just defined by your pulse. You just measure the full pulse, and you have one that happened. When you start from continuous squeezing, it's a bit harder to know when you have to measure and so on. Here it's pulse, so you have just to be sure you measure the same pulse. And the repetition rate was quite low, and it's below 1 megahertz, so you can be faster than the repetition rate. Okay? But it's really a complicated issue, this mode matching between what the detectors detect here, because you want to be sure that the mode detected by your single photon here is the same as the one detecting by your homodyne detection here. And that's a hard problem. Okay? It can be done, but it's not simple. Okay, and why, to finish on that, well, to actually finish these lectures, how does this combine with a multimode approach? Okay, so this was single mode. Can you do the same for multimode? So can you do mode-dependent photon subtractions, and why is it important? So first, before I tell you how to do, I want to tell you why it's complicated. So this is again the same thing. So if you remember, I remove photon, I get my negative Wigner functions by removing the photon from a squeeze state. So you could think naively, I take my multimode squeezing here, I put it here, and I do exactly the same. This doesn't work. And why does it doesn't work is because if you do that, it's a bit like we have seen before for the single photon generations. Your beam splitter here is not mode selective. So it will reflect the photon from all the modes, and you don't know which one you will measure. So at the output, what you will get here, if you start from a pure state, which is psi, you will get a statistical superpositions between removing a photon in mode 1, removing a photon in mode 2, removing a photon in mode 3, and so on. Okay? And this is very different from removing a current superposition of A to my psi, which is here. So this density matrix is very different from this pure state here. Okay? It's not factorized. So if you just do like that, this is complicated. There's two, maybe I can do a quick drawing, because this has been done. If you take two squeeze states, somehow the thing you want to do is remove a photon from a mode which can be either one of the squeeze states, but it can be also one of the entangled states. So this I want just to explain to motivate a little bit, and these things are not fully done experimentally yet. So if you look at this Mach-Zehnder configuration we have seen this morning, you see that here we have squeeze state, here we have entangled state, and here we have back squeeze state. Okay, and so here you are not entangled. So the objective of what we want to do, but not only us, is, so this is a two-mode cluster state, is to be able to remove photons either from a squeeze state, which is here, but maybe more interesting, from one of the entangled mode, so that you will change the Wigner function of your full state. Because if you act only on this one will not be changed. Okay? And why is this interesting? So this I don't do the mathematics. If you do that, you can show two things. So first, you can show that the Wigner function of the total state become indeed negative. So this is what you are looking for. And second, you can see that here, if you do the beam splitter again, your state is not separable anymore. So this state you generate here with the photon subtraction here becomes non-separable, whatever the basis. So it starts to look a bit more like the Bell state you are looking for. Okay, so it has these two properties, and this is really the motivation of this kind of things. 5 minutes, should manage. No, but anyway, I've said the main message, and now I can show you a few things. So how do we do that? So to do that, so it's very hard. If you want to remove a photon from a given temporal mode with linear optics, you will never manage. So in fact, what we do here is that we use, and I didn't put the equations, I just try to explain by hands, we use some frequency. So some frequency is the opposite of parametric down conversions. So I take my squeeze light here, which is at 800 nanometers. I take a gate beam, I will come back to that, which is the same frequency. I've got a crystal here, and I will take one photon from here and one photon from here. We'll give a blue photon here that will go in that direction for phase matching reason. Okay? So if I do it with a weak interaction, I will have at most one photon here. And if I detect a photon here, I know I have removed a photon from this thing here. Okay? And now all the thing you have to do when you do experiment, and this is really inspired from work from the group of Christine Silberhorn, is to engineer again the phase matching of your crystal so that your crystals become single mode. So it's exactly as we have said before. Before I did the decomposition of my crystals, which was many modes. You want it to be single mode, which means what? Which means that if I shape the pulse here, the sum frequency will act only between this pulse shape and the corresponding pulse shape, which is here. And it will not interact with the other one. So hopefully, what you will get is this kind of state of the output. Okay, so the two ones remain squeezed, and this one has a negative Wigner functions. Okay, and it's some frequency, so it's the opposite as what we have done before. So this is an experiment we have been doing. I'm hesitating. Should I show? No, I will not show the details. So when you do this kind of experiments, first you're not sure that the phase matching of the crystal does what you want. So at the output, what you know is that we have removed photons, but you don't know from where. So you have a coupling matrix which is here, which is a bit complicated. So the first thing you do is that you measure that matrix experimentally, and I will just show you the result of the matrix itself. So the matrix we find is this one. So this is really this coupling matrix which is here in the basis of the Hermite-Gauss modes. And what you find is that if your reference beam has this shape, this matrix has only one term, which is here, meaning that it removes photons only from this shape. If you shape in here, what you find is matrix is only here, with a bit more noise here, but anyway, if you control your reference beam with this shape, you remove a photon from this mode. And if you make a superposition of them, you can do complicated shapes that are still remain single mode. Okay, so this really does single mode operation. And to conclude, I just show you two experimental results doing that. So the experiments look like that. You generate your squeeze states in different pulse shapes. So remember, this is all together co-propagating. Then you remove photon in a mode which is controlled by this beam, and you make the tomography here. And what you get, I'll move on now because time is running. What you get is this. I like this one. What you get is this. If you move the photons, so if you control here, you move photon from here, what you get is a negative linear function here and change here. And you can change this and change the photon here, and so on. Okay, so there's many more examples, but I guess time is running now, and I prefer we keep a little time for questions. So what we have done also is removing a photon from a superposition of modes and show that indeed you change the Gaussianity of these superpositions, and you can do all these things. Well, I had some conclusion slides, but I'm not sure I need them. I guess, or it's not. I'm not sure it's that interesting. Yeah, I will still show that one. So this is just to show that these things in continuous variables, we are not the only one to do. Huh? So there's people doing these things. There's a group of Furusawa doing different kind of modes. And this continuous variables quantum optics applies to also different systems. So that's nice if you know this theory. I mean, circuit QED start to do continuous variables. When you move mirrors, you also do continuous variables. Trapped ions also use this kind of motions. So this can be applied to many different modes. I wanted to show that because I still wanted to thank people from my group that work on that, and in particular Claude Fabre, which is here, which is emeritus. But all this approach was also derived by him and the former member of the group. And with this, it's exactly 6, so I thank you for your attention. Yes, please. So I could, and this might take a lot of time. So except if ever, because I'm happy to answer maybe later on, but I'm not sure it's, so I don't know what you think. Should I answer later or? Yeah, maybe we'll discuss that later together. I think it, because yeah, I will need 10 minutes at least to explain to you, but it's indeed, I'm happy to discuss that later. Some more questions? Don't hesitate, it's not because I say I won't answer to this one. Yes?
So the scalability, you have shown now like up to, let's say, 5-6 modes.
Yes.
They work quite nice. So these are just experimental limitations, or you can go to 100 modes at some point?
So that's, okay, so that's indeed very important question. So there are several answers. So in our case, so, and this is the question which was asked over there, the limitation is the spread of the local oscillator. So now we are working on with a PCF fiber to increase the spectrum of the local oscillator. And we hope we will go to 20, 30 modes.
So you want to shrink the pulse?
To shrink the pulse, exactly, to increase the spectrum. Okay? And then you can use this kind of trick, which was done by, introduced by Akira Furusawa, and we can do the same, in fact. So at the output of your cavity, you have each pulse, which can be separated into a set of pulses which are squeezed. What you can do is make interact one set of pulse with a pulse which is behind. So use a delay line and a beam splitter to mix a pulse with the one which is behind. And then doing that, you can do a time-consuming cluster state, which now can be as long as you want. So doing this kind of trick, I demonstrated millions of modes. And this trick, in fact, is compatible with our system. So just meaning you mix, you put a delay line in between, okay, which is exactly the distance between two pulses. So there's technicalities I'll be happy to comment, but there's a way to do that. So in our case, at one time you can have 20 or 30 modes, and then you can do time multiplexing, so to have at each time 20, 30 modes which are connected together, and you can go to millions of modes this way. But if we manage to do something interesting with 20 modes, it would really be enough at start.
No more other questions? All right, so great now.
Okay, thank you.